And I serve as, good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Anderson, and I serve as the program specialist for the Title II program, Adult Education and Literacy, as administered by the South Dakota Department of Labor and Regulation and delivered by many, if not all of you, as local providers and WIOA one-stop partners. In preparation for today's proceedings, I have a lot of links and ideas and references and resources, but at the same time, I'd like it to be more conversational. So I encourage you, interrupt me at any point. You can chat, drop a note in the chat box, and maybe if I miss it, some of our colleagues can draw attention to that and really help drive today's conversation and help make those connections. I want it to be meaningful to all of you. And as I prepared this, I realized it got pretty dense pretty quickly. So if my slide advances here, yes, as noted in the T3 description, right, data have the capacity to inform different policy decisions. Some of you might be aware there are a couple of competing, there's a Senate Bill 65 here in South Dakota legislation to change compulsory school attendance from 18 to 16. There's also a House resolution for juvenile justice to consider a third option toward high school diploma, GED. They want a third option that may include apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship, or some sort of work-based learning. So we see then there's the potential for the Title II program as GED is discussed, as education and combined with workforce training are discussed, where we now find ourselves trying to prove our program efficacy. Of course, you use these data for instructional approaches. We use them at the state level and federal level for funding determinations. Through patterns with LACIS or on-site monitors or just general telephonic technical assistance, I can sometimes identify patterns. Or when we rolled out PrEP policy a year and a half ago, where we're trying to braid and blend and heighten our partnership with Title I, we could see that there were some unknowns, some uncertainties, and policy points that needed clarification. So these data inform all of that, as well as your capacity and your local effectiveness. And when I say organizational capacity, I suppose I mean not only human resources, but really it could be your physical capacity, space-wise. Are you virtual? Are you on-site? Are you hybrid? Technical capacity, all of that. And so if you can see this overview, I've got quite a few points here, and we don't have a lot of time. And again, I don't want to lecture and droll ad nauseum about all these opportunities. But before we delve, I kind of wanted to give you an overview of where we might contextualize these data and how they really serve all these purposes that we bulleted in that previous slide. So we're going to take a look at our most recent data. That would be program year 21-22. We're going to look at those in aggregate, of course. Then we'll see how those compare to national figures. And we can't really have these conversations without approaching it through the lens of data quality. And really, some of the things that guide data quality are the South Dakota Assessment Policy, the NRS Technical Assistance Guide, and then I guess we see the data quality. I'd like to show briefly within these statewide performance reports across the WIOA programming. We're all reporting certain common measures, right? Joint PEARL items. And by PEARL, I should say it's really the technical data that are entered within our respective databases. It's the personal information record layout. It's all the formatting that goes in to feed these, reports in aggregate, and even our workforce partners have to detail reports on individual participants. And I think you have a sense of that when we talk about prep and those dashboards within SharePoint, all of those hours you collect and assessments you administer and credentials that are earned and scale scores that are recorded and held confidentially, ultimately get reported not only for Title II, but oftentimes if they're co-enrolled, our workforce partners or our voc rehab partners can also report those for their own common participants. Next up would be the Federal Register. And as we talk about assessments, the Federal Register is really where the federal government details what assessments are allowable for Title II activities. One of my favorite portals is the National Reporting Systems public portal. And even without a username and password, you really do have access to quite a bit of data. Not all of the data I can access and reports that I can with my user account, but still significant. I'm going to pause there a moment. And from transitioning to data quality, thinking about where these data go, where these data go after we report them from your classroom to your data specialist, or maybe you directly input those into LACES, and then from LACES, the data cleanse, the data freeze, the data matching, and then the data reporting to the National Reporting System, and then where those data go. And that really takes us to like informing our statistical adjustment model, these congressional hearings, as well as federal appropriations. And when we get to talk about financing, right, our data are rather intrinsically linked to funding. And so nowadays, if we fail to meet our negotiated targets, we can potentially face sanctions. Sanctions under WIOA have yet to come about or manifest because they were on hold for the first number of years of WIOA adoption because we needed baseline data. And then just when they were getting to activate those sanctionable thresholds, then COVID hit. And so that really threw the proverbial wrench into the works. So I'm not sure what the timeline is here, and I try not to lose sleep over it, but it's still really, it really does help inform the data from your class to the national level. And then for all those interested in sundry resources, we've got statute, we've got AFLA's regulations, we've got our unified state plan, which is accessible at the portal. And then when we really get detailed, we can get into the uniform administrative requirements. Those are the grant requirements. And admittedly, you might ask, well, John, I think that's getting ridiculous. Why would we get into all of the fiduciary and audit requirements? But within that, and if time permits, we can see that, things like FERPA, right? The Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act, which governs our Title II data, are part of this. So I wish we could go to just one neat place within SharePoint or on the website or at, octave.gov. But it's a bit complex, as you might expect from such a bureaucracy. Comments, thoughts, questions, or requests before we commence further? Or any questions right off the bat that that might help frame this for you. Of these, how about this? Of these various bullets and references and resources, how many do you deal with on a monthly basis?
I would say for me, almost all of them. And I think for my staff, a huge chunk of them. More
And do
than
you think,
want to admit.
do you think that that would be the assessment policy primarily is where they might spend a lot of time? Or do you think even something that might not be on here, like those new SharePoint dashboards or your own local data reports that I suppose you look at them on a regular basis, a quarterly basis during staff meetings or something?
Almost weekly,
Really?
that there's something that
Terrific.
comes up. Yep.
Well, I would
Others,
say,
go ahead.
I would,
Yep.
I'm sorry, I would say a lot of what we do and a lot of conversations happen on a regular basis, just with WIOA and AFLA regulations and making sure that what we're doing and anything that we're considering actually is in line with the state and federal statutes and regulations.
Mhm, mhm. Do you see my screen? I hit escape. Can you see my screen now? Can I just share my desktop? Or do I need to stop and reshare? Is that how that works?
No, you should be able to share it.
So if I click here on assessment policy,
We see your, yep, we see.
you see the assessment
SharePoint.
policy now?
Yep.
Oh, wow. Okay, terrific. So, I mean, I would like all of you to at least know about the assessment policy. I think that is one important place to start. If you don't have familiarity with that, please get some familiarity. Know that it's on SharePoint. I also email it annually at the 1st of July, but I archive it on SharePoint. And of all of the policies, this one for our state level, as a state level policy that's federally approved, this is most important. And it's not uncommon if we were to have a federal monitor, an audit where they would come and visit on site. It hasn't happened since 2011. But often this would be a question. They would ask instructional staff just in passing, say, you're familiar with your assessment policy and where is it? And so, not that I'm teaching to the test, but we should all know where the assessment policy resides. I don't expect you to memorize it. And if you have questions, follow your local chain of command, but I'm always here. I'd hate for you to spend 2 hours searching only for me to be able to point you in the right direction in a matter of minutes. And for context, right, the state assessment policy really is a distillation of this, our technical assistance guide from the National Reporting System. And hopefully you should all have a blue copy. Since I last had hard copies made, there's been an update. So I haven't had copies made since before March 2021, but I'm not adverse to it. It does take time to generate an order and place it, but I do like having this. But as you might be able to see, there are over 200 pages in here within this National Reporting System Technical Assistance Guide. It covers, you know, our data collection, our data entry, our data reporting, even some data analysis, you know, student performance indicators, tables. And so I don't expect many of you to have strong working familiarity with this document, but you should know its existence. And when you have those technical questions about, I've got a student or I've got a period of participation, this is where I turn, and all programs turn really for definitive guidance. Our state assessment policy just being a modest distillation of this with our local flair, as in, right, in South Dakota, we use TABE and Best Plus, Best Literacy. So those are the assessments we detail in our state-specific assessment policy.
John, that's in the SharePoint, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good question. So within SharePoint, here's the workforce partners. All of you should have access. If you don't, all of the Title II funded partners, providers should have access. If you don't, let me know. But, you know, I'm from Cornerstones. Regardless, I should see this Title II document library here. And these particular resources would be, what were we were talking about? Technical assistance guide. So yeah, that's right here. Let's see that.
John, can
Yeah.
I ask a quick question about that?
Always.
Just for clarification, so I know what I'm talking about. So in that Title II document library on SharePoint, in the NRS folder there, are those documents specific to South Dakota, or are those provided directly from NRS? You know what I'm asking?
Yep, perfect question. Real good question. So Jeremy, specifically, our assessment policy, I have listed under assessments. And so that it reads South Dakota's PY 2022 assessment policy. I try to be as descriptive in my labeling as I can within reason. But to your question, NRS, those are all sort of titled with NRS at the beginning. So these are all NRS, and you can quickly see the NRS logo here right at the top. And I generally try to brand our things with the DLR logo, I guess, when possible.
So those are coming from the national.
So
level, the
these,
national
yes,
reporting system.
these
Okay,
here, the NRS are federal, absolutely.
thank you so much.
Yeah. Good question. You know, I like this benchmarks. Many of you have probably seen this. And if you're working with assessments a lot, you probably have it taped to your desk. And you can get an editable version. I've done it before where I just delete all of the assessments that are germane to South Dakota. But this is the national one, but of course, right, we don't use CASAS. So that could just be deleted and simplified so I can see my tabes. Of course, there's a lot of redundancy, right? These same data and information are also available in the assessment policy, but there are some one-page or you know, more truncated resources for ease. Good questions. Yeah, Octave memoranda, all of this prefaced with Octave comes specifically from the Office of Career, Technical and Adult Ed. And here's a whole nother facet of, you know, we're looking at statute, we're looking at guidance, and then we have to look at memos. And this is their way that they essentially update the new rules. WIOA was authorized in 2014. I don't know, it was up for reauthorization last year. It doesn't sound promising. It sounds like there are a lot of other competing priorities. And so this is the way the feds can make updates without going through a full federal reauthorization or without legislative approval. It's sort of like executive authority. All right. You know, and I'd be remiss too if I didn't stress the importance of the statute. And yeah, I mean, the WIOA is 300 pages, but if you really look at Title II, we start here on page 1608, I don't know, document page, what is it, 184, but really, there are probably only 12 pages here, and it's rather dense, but even at the instructor level, you know, when you're out there talking to your partners or businesses or employers. And yes, it depends on the scope of your authority and your involvement, but you know, the statute defines all of our activities and they're very nuanced. And so I think it's really important to know what the WIOA affords us, especially you at the local level, because it's with your creative interpretation and recognizing your community needs that you can be responsive and more successful within your community and amongst your partners. So this would also, I would also strongly advocate that you take the time and maybe even during a staff meeting, just go through a section at a time. And you'll quickly realize which ones don't have any bearing. And I could help you offline sort that, but I think that would be useful for administrators and instructors alike. All right. Let me just show you the Federal Register. We don't, I know sometimes there, I'm sure only on a rare occasion are there frustrations with our standardized assessments. But in those moments of frustration, please remember that I don't derive these rules. We have to follow these federal authorities. And so it outlines here which assessments are determined suitable, right? Table 11 and 12, here's the, you know, contact information, the dates through which they're active. And so just remember that's the framework in which we need to operate. Let us, if there aren't pressing questions on the Federal Register or the Technical Assistance Guide or our state assessment policy, maybe we'll pivot and look a little bit at some data resources. This is the National Reporting Systems public portal, right? And you can see public access here. And quite a slick interface. We just click on South Dakota. And it brings up our possible data, our data sets. And if you can see, at the top, the most recent is 2021, right? Program year 20. And even though we have submitted program year 21-22 data, they have yet to be federally approved. That's why they're not available on the public portal. Once I sign in, I can go in and show you my interface, but these are the most recent data publicly available. So you can click here. You know, there's a really nice drop-down menu. You can sort. You can view here. For all of you who enjoy spreadsheets and Excel, they've come a long way with this old portal to this new iteration. You can download the entirety of, look at that. You can download the entirety of the state's NRS tables from program year 2021, right? Here's the statewide performance report, our measurable skill gain table. Let's see, that's pretty small, right? Tables 1 through 14. You can even download our federal fiscal tables, right? And for example, and I know I'm getting pretty specific here, but it's really when we talk about integrated education and training, right? And career services versus training services, all those things in the classroom that we have to track. Black Hills and Lutheran Social Services do have integrated education and training. LSS has to provide integrated education and training because they receive integrated English literacy and civics funds. They're the only provider that gets these funds. But then we have to track how much of that was spent on instruction. And so for those who work with those fiscal reports, where I always ask, between grade level, right? Or NRS levels 1 through 4, operating below the 9th grade level versus adult secondary ed. So we have to split the funding. We have to separate the instructional by program, as well as training from career services. But for those who are interested, it's really nice to have all these tables, if you're inclined. Now, let me go ahead and log in. Oh, when it works, it's wonderful. All right. So before we jump there, I'd like to show you, we talk about, we're going to look at performance. And so let's just, sorry. Hopefully you can see that well. Let me give you a moment to reflect on this. This is program year. This is our most recent year, 21-22. I submitted these data in October, 1st of October, 22. Each educational functioning level, right? And I have to negotiate a target. Now we negotiate 2 years at a time. So I negotiated for 21-22 and 22-23 in one sitting. And here are the percentages by educational functioning level. This is our target under goal, and of course our actual in the right column. I marked those with orange, sort of a coral color, of which we didn't meet that negotiated target, and green where we did. So these top 12, right? We have 6, when we have 4 levels, these first 4, adult basic ed, and then levels 5 and 6, adult secondary ed, and then our ESL levels. And then the second section is aggregate. And this is newer, and Octave has some really robust pivot tables and spreadsheets and formulae where they, based on historical data, can estimate what we need to get, what participation levels we need to evidence in order to reach our target. So that's why we have 2 numbers here. And you'll see this because I want you to make the connection. I have a hard time with that. Assessment policy here. Let's go back. Right. I also have these. They're one of the first pages here on the assessment policy. I try to put them in multiple places so you can see them. Anyway. No. We negotiated overall 41%. If you see that aggregate measurable skill gain, and the feds anticipated that we would need to have 974 successful outcomes per periods of participation. So that combines measurable skill gains as demonstrated on an educational functioning level gain on a post-test or a high school equivalency. 41% or 974. That last year we evidenced 609 successful periods of participation with a measurable skill gain or credential, and only 36% ABE. And we break it out here based on student numbers, right? These percentages can vacillate wildly because we might only have 30 people in that high intermediate ESL, where we might have 300 in the high intermediate ABE. So that's why these numbers can change. But based on these figures, we were looking for 33% on ESL and 45 for ABE plus ASE combined. And the same goes with our follow-up indicators. Thoughts, comments, or observations here?
I always wonder, and I know there's no exact demographic state to ours, but I always wonder how comparable are our negotiated performance standards with similar states.
Yeah. Yes. Good question. And I know the feds over the years have systematized, standardized. They've made real efforts in consistency because yeah, before it was how chummy were you with your regional coordinator and how demanding were there. But now the next screen will show, I'll show you how it's pretty straightforward how they expect us to negotiate rates now. But other observations here or comments?
John, I know you might get into this later, and if I'm jumping the gun, or if you're just not
Okay.
going to talk about it, that's fine. But where does the statistical adjustment model come into play in
Good.
looking at these data?
Good, yes. Thank you, Becky. You set me up well. And we will talk about that, I think, in the next two resources. I would just offer here as conjecture anecdotal, you know, we really outperformed expectations in high intermediate ABE, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but that should be TABE level D, grade level equivalencies 6 through 9, right? I remember CC Estes told me in 2010, that's the hump, John. And that's a lot of years and that's a lot of upskilling. But I don't know if last year with our prep initiatives and efforts, with a lot of students right around that NRS 3 and 4, if we didn't see some of that because of those heightened or emphasized overtures.
I think the trend that we've seen also in TABE 11-12 almost makes everything one step higher, right? So what we
right.
used to think of as high intermediate ABE, I mean, now those students are almost performing that level is almost performing like the low adult secondaries were
Yep.
in the past.
Right. And so we've kind of, and I know that's affected you and STAR because STAR was built around those intermediate learners. I had a little heart palpitation the other day almost when I saw field testing for TABE 13-14, and I thought, oh goodness, I don't know. Although it sure would be nice to better align that with GED or high school equivalency outcomes. Anyway, I think maybe one of the most important aspects as we think about, you know, each one of your students populates that, right? If you have students at that ESL level, they're part of that percentage. Really, these top 12 rows and the column figure, they don't matter. It's just this aggregate. So we might, you know, only hit 4 of these, but if we get that overall 41%, we would hit 41%. It doesn't matter about each EFL. Those are just there to give you some guidance. And if you work with LACIS, you'll see those in the dashboards and to give us estimates based on historical data. Ultimately, the bottom line is the aggregate. So with that, my other observation anecdotally is look at all that green in the follow-up indicators. Employment Q2, employment Q4, median earnings, almost $1,500 over our target. We are one of 6 or 7 states in the nation, right? Which Title II program is housed in the Department of Labor or Workforce Development. And so I often make that argument when we're negotiating performance with our federal counterparts that's really where we really need to be considering or concentrating. So go
I
ahead.
also wonder about like you look at credential attainment. If you take out the number of people served through corrections who might be in corrections and not necessarily have access to a lot of credential attainment at this point in juncture. And then the English language learners, which are a whole new game and a big chunk of who we serve in our state now. It's interesting. Honestly, I think that we're still at 30%.
You know,
And with the
go ahead.
unemployment rate and the wages that people are paying, so we don't need every year.
Yeah, well, and you know, maybe we lean into what we do well, and yeah, I mean, the demographics, the data only can tell so much of the story. This is not something that's available publicly, but here I can sort through the past, 5 years or so, and this gives a quartile ranking. Fourth quartile, this mustard color, of course, being the highest, and this neon pink being the median down here. So I'll scroll. So this is the median, right? And we're not averaging. That's the very middle. And South Dakota, I mean, we're down here at the bottom of the range for, they break it down by ABE, which includes adult secondary ed. So NRS levels 1 through 6, and then ESL, and then combined. And you'll see as I scroll down, South Dakota here, 38 for both ABE and ABE and ESL. And then when you combine our data, we drop to 40th in the nation, which puts us, second quartile in that yellow.
Wait,
now-
where was
go ahead.
Minnesota there? Minnesota was below us?
Did you see Minnesota below us?
Uh,
Minnesota here, that's employment. So no, if we
Right.
look at Minnesota on the overall, probably look at Wyoming, second in the nation. Minnesota. Wow. Maybe you
I
did,
think
Becky.
down in the pink
Look
below
at
us.
that, 48th.
What happened there?
In 22, their state director died and Brad Haskamp took over. So I don't know if there's some transitional
Well,
issues
and
or COVID.
Minnesota was very locked down through COVID.
Yeah,
Very
Yeah.
locked. The
yeah.
world stopped in Minnesota.
That's true. Yeah.
So
be
this is
honest.
fair.
It's not really good. It's not the cleanest data as far as without having lots of things that are out of control. We can't
Right.
control.
Right. I have this and I'd like to send it. I should really get a screenshot so I can send it to all the participants. I'll send you this this PowerPoint because it has all of these links integrated. So if you ever have the interest to browse, the links are all there. But here's where we shine. And this is where I really try to leverage. But South Dakota, top quartile, right? Fourth quartile for second quarter employment, fourth quarter employment, median earnings, and we even made third quartile with our credentials at 30%, 31%. So I'm quite pleased. And I think it just goes to show, the strengths of the programming. With an economy where we're 2.5% unemployment, and now I'm going to jump to
Yeah.
address
but you wanna be-
Becky's
You want
questions.
to be careful.
ahead.
You want to be careful about saying, well, our unemployment rate's so low, so that's why our programs are low. Because then it's like, well, then maybe you don't need adult ed. So you can almost argue yourself out of your money and your program.
Well, and I just think it goes to show that, I don't want to, because our assessments are important, especially assessments that when we can use the diagnostic information, that we can help the learner understand demonstrated progress. We can use it for local accountability, but we're not in a college system where it's focused around testing, right? We're in a state where jobs are the focus, and you know better than I how many jobs your students are holding down and coming to school after class and overnight shift, etc. But Becky had asked about the statewide, the statistical adjustment model. And, in full transparency, I I'm not well versed in that. I find it unnecessarily complex. Nonetheless, where do I have it? Standards, intake form. Oh, maybe I have it on the other side. I thought I shared the resources here. Oh, I did. So in participation and performance, there are a couple of tools here. And one's a modeling tool. And it's very robust. You can drop it down and look at any state in the nation and look at their data over these past number of years. And here's the trend for the past, between 2010 and 2019, we pretty much were at 40%. Sometimes we dipped up 42% or dipped down to 39. But we have yet to really get anywhere near pre-COVID levels. But Becky, if you're interested, there are these two specific state resources. And then I also linked within this PowerPoint a resource here within the National Reporting System where you can go look. It has the memorandum and in the same modeling tool there. So
And John,
what that means contextually, yep.
Sorry, refresh my memory. One of the things that can affect that statistical adjustment is the barriers that we mark for our individual
Yes.
students, correct?
Yes, and that's where I think we can make the most context out of that. When you're collecting barriers, low literacy levels, single parent, all of that's on the student intake form. Again, I could pull that up for reference. And those demographics and the highest level of education, all of that go into these formula, and it has a coefficient rate. How that actually works out, then it's aggregated and added to our final figures. Contextually for you, let's look at it in the statewide performance report here. So let's just go reporting tables. Okay, well, I've got a better place for it. I also have it linked here. This is the national site, and it's listed by state. We can go back all the way to 2016 when WIOA was really first implemented. And here's the statewide performance report. And to Becky's point, this is what all those demographic data go to inform, right? There's that training services for integrated education and training. These are the career services that we talk about. But these are fascinating tables where we break it down by age, race, ethnicity. And then our bread and butter, right, is the measurable skill gain. Our bread is the measurable skill gain, and our butter are the follow-up outcomes, I guess, as I like to think about it. The employment, second quarter, fourth quarter, the median earnings here, and the credential rate in the column. And so you can see them by race, ethnicity, and then of course, to Becky's point, all of these ticks here, ex-offender status, single parent, they all get populated into these complex formulae that, oh, that's not the one, that inform this statistical adjustment model. And so the more we can show that we're serving the most in need, the better that affects our statistical adjustment model. So for example, we got 40% and we negotiated 41%, but given that we had a lot of English language learners and justice involved folks, it actually adjusted our performance to 41.8. Well, boom, 42%, we just made our, as a hypothetical, it could make a difference. I think it's just important that we get as accurate data as we can. Don't lose sleep over it, but it's accurate data as we can, because that gives us a better chance for more robust and accurate and meaningful case management with our partners or just with that student. A couple other things I wanted to, relate. in addition to the statistical adjustment model, these data at your local level go all the way to the federal level and get discussed during these reauthorization hearings for the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And in preparation, I thought this was pretty interesting. So in a bicameral legislature at the federal level, right, we have our Senate and our House of Representatives, and then there are standing committees which review policy and proposed language. And then there are authorizing committees, which are also known as appropriations, and they have the purse strings. And there are two on each side of the Congress. So like right here, this is the House of Representatives Subcommittee on Labor, Health, Human Services, and Education. So that's the purse strings on the House side. And then you have the purse strings on the Senate side. And as an historical aside, Patty Murray was just elected. She was the first female Senate pro tempore in our nation's history. So I guess that puts her second in line after, or second in line after the vice president within the Senate. And you see some big names, right? Dick Durbin, Chris Murphy, Tammy Baldwin, Joe Manchin. They hold the purse strings, and Marco Rubio on the Senate side. And then on the House side, and this I found kind of interesting, now that the House is under Republican control, this is what pops up, this throwing shade on the Biden administration, right? The Biden administration is pursuing reckless student loan policies. Anyway, nothing like a bit of partisanship on the old government websites. But this Committee on Education and Workforce hold, this is the policy side of things, right? Not the appropriations. And so we've got Elise Stefanik, big names. So when you see that, the federal posturing and the performance politics, I mean, they really do, Madison Cawthorn, they really do have a direct control over WIOA funding and WIOA reauthorization. And if you've heard anything now, not that we need to get into political prognostications, but the House, they want funding cuts now. And what I just heard from the national lobbyist for NASDAQ, quote, they're not taking a scalpel, they're using a jackhammer. I mean, they are talking about, they want to go after like 20% cuts. So it makes work, COAB's work, or SDL's outreach and other advocacy all the more important as we have to continue to fight for funding. Questions or comments at this point? You know, what you can do, there's so much that you do every day that is really dictated by these statutes, regulations, final rules, requirements, you know, with the FERPA, you know, here, even FERPA, adult education, right there, right? So we're under those auspices. You can make sure you get a signature on your student intake form always. And if they're not willing to sign that, we can still serve them. We just can't put them into the database. You can make sure your student records are are locked when they're not in use, that they maintain confidentiality and they're secure. You know, when you transmit information with your WIOA partners, please use the drop boxes in SharePoint rather than email, because you're not a state employee unless you're with the OC, of course, and you don't have the built-in encryption and the state safeguards. So I want to keep you as subrecipients and WIOA partners compliant from those regards as well. And then we just got to continue talking about the assessment policy, statute, technical assistance guide, and real world application, so we can, most importantly, deliver high quality instruction or instructional services to your students and help support you and your other data specialists for high quality, accurate data. Do any of you have any comments or suggestions or examples of how you use data in a local, statewide, regional, or national context?
I can give one right now. On my screen is a end of year report for one of our larger funding organizations in one of the communities. And we end up pulling a lot of data from not only to get the funding, but to prove that we use the funding as we said we would. So it's our tracking system for not only our AFLA funding, but it's imperative that we have that information for our other funding supports, because adult ed does require a match, you know, on our adult ed funding. So this is one of those ways we match that funding.
I appreciate that, Kim. A couple items I want you to know within SharePoint here in the Title II document library under NRS participation and performance, I have, going back a number of years, but if you click on the most recent, there are 2 references. And we were looking, you know, Becky had that good question about, well, how does that impact the statistical adjustment model and that statewide performance report? And here's my attempt to, well, too big, sorry, to sort of synthesize the statewide performance report. And if you get a chance to look at that, I think it's a good at a glance. Especially, looking at the demographics by race or barrier or gender, sex, and median earnings, etc., to get a real high level. And then for those who are quite curious, this is a dense resource, and this is internal only. We don't share this with external partners, but this gives a breakdown. It's the only reference that really compares other agency that shares other agency detail, almost like not a ranking, but a report card, I guess, for lack of a better term. But I'm weary of those kind of resources because we often serve the very same student. I believe in building collaboration. We don't award funding based on performance. It's not a performance-based funding model. And I'm really trying to build collaboration and coordination across the statewide program and beyond. So, but still, to those natural questions, I too like to look at how we compare to similar states, whether that's geography, size, single area, workforce, board, etc. So, and then, please let me underscore, if you have any data related questions, don't hesitate to contact me or bring them to the LACES webinars or go ahead.
John, when you say, well, it's like you're looking at other people's stuff for like competition. It isn't always competition. A lot of times some of us are trying to figure out, we know we have I mean, we're micromanaging our program and we know we have this issue right in here. Does somebody else doing it right, doing something different that's getting them a different outcome? And so then you can have those conversations about what are you doing here? And is it totally a fluke, or do they have a certain concerted effort they've made to address something in there? So there's something to be said for that too.
That's perfect, Kim. That's perfect because, even PD, when we're talking about data-driven decisions and we're seeing that it's in statute, it's a required leadership activity to disseminate promising practices. So yeah, if there's one agency doing things particularly well for a particular subgroup, it's not only incumbent upon us, it's required of us to share that. And, we can identify that anecdotally, like, wow, this is really working well. It feels good, a lot of happiness. But we can also determine that, does it just feel good, or do we see the progress or the results in the data as well? Yeah, excellent point, Kim. Thank you. So again, if you ever have questions, go through your local protocol. I imagine your data specialists are probably fairly facile or adroit with disaggregating your student data so you can look at your student records, but please know how important. And if you ever get a chance to put this into real world learning and a student balks at maybe an assessment or a release of information, you can tell them how important it is that we get those data. We don't submit data, unlike our partners, we don't submit individual student data. We only aggregate, right? Only in those combined totals. And in doing so, we can continue to make a good case that there's a need and that we're effective and that we're serving our communities and states well by collecting, entering, and reporting these data. So important. And data are fun, so, and messy, sometimes messy. Ladies and gentlemen, any last questions or comments for the good of the order?
Don't forget it's National Popcorn Day. There's a whole bunch of data related to that. If you did A&I, there's a bunch of data related to popcorn.
Always thinking about realia and contextualized learning. Thank you, everyone. Happy New Year, ladies and gentlemen. Stay warm, drive safely, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Bye now.